Hello, everybody, and a warm welcome back to the Double Waved Yellow podcast. Today, we are going to review the event of the 2021 Italian Grand Prix. Lots of stuff to talk about, as always, and of course, as always, my two colleagues joining me, Hodders and Tyson. Hey, guys.
Hey.
In sync there, good stuff. Hodders, it's actually been a quiet race in terms of the support front. We've only got Formula 2 to look at, but a major talking point in the Formula 1 race.
There was, but I don't want to say anything too early.
No, absolutely. Spoilers. If you want to know what it's about, you've got to listen to all of the podcasts. And as always, starting that off is Tyson with the Formula 2 news.
All right. So it's been a while since we've seen the Formula 2 cars make an appearance. 8 weeks since the last race in Silverstone. So a quick recap of where we are. Oscar Piastri came into the weekend leading the championship with Guan Yu Zhou only 5 points behind. Robert Schwartzman, Dan Ticktum, Yuri Vips, they're all drivers to watch very much in the running if they put up some good results. And qualifying ended up being a very close affair. Piastri, he put it on pole, just edging out Johan Ruvela and championship rival Zhou by 500ths of a second. David Beckman qualified 10th, which, just like in Formula 3, after reversing top 10, puts him on pole for the first sprint race, which, to put it kindly, was very on brand for Formula 2. 2 virtual safety cars, 2 safety cars, and a whole bunch of the orange and black meatball flags being flown. So many broken rings, so many broken wings around the track, I was convinced Mr. Mystery were about to make an appearance. Snapiness aside, we got a real entertaining I'm going to have to redo that, aren't I?
No, keep it going. We're keeping. That's
going.
not a blooper, folks. We're keeping that in there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, snarkiness aside, we got a real entertaining, enjoyable race that saw Dale Pocher move his way up through the Carnage from 4th to take the race win. Vips took the lead right from lights out, but he wasn't able to carry the momentum through the race and ended up chewing up his tyres, falling back through the pack. This allowed Titan challenger Guan Yu Zhou to make his way past him, finish second on the podium for 6th. But the real big winner of the race was Christian Lundgaard, who managed to keep his cool, avoid all the major incidents around him, and ended up taking the final podium spot. A brilliant result for him after having a poor qualifying. Beckman suffered from heavy tyre degradation throughout the race and fell down the order, but he was able to finish 10th, which gave him a second chance as the ball set up a sprint race too. Unfortunately, his start was almost identical, this time mugged off the line by Johan Ruvela, who went on to control a relatively more peaceful race to take his first win of the season. Beckman seemed to be on for a podium, but a lock-up late in the race ended up ruining his tyres and allowed Ben Biscal and Robert Schwartzman through to take the second and third places on the podium, respectively. But special mention has to be given to Schwartzman, who only qualified 12th, but he kept his head down in the sprint races, got on with it, and put in some solid results for himself. For the championship contenders, Piastri had a great fight with Teo Porcher, which lasted several laps. He was finally able to find a way through and ended up finishing 7th, while Zhou took the final point-paying position in 8th to keep within reach of his rival. Moving on to the Sunday morning, and I thought the first sprint race on the Saturday was something to feature, just one of the most exciting, action-packed races of the season for me. Piastri got off the line well. Zhou managed to pass to Ruvela, kept the pressure on for the lead throughout the entire race, but just wasn't able to find a way past despite a daring side-by-side move in the final laps. They kept it clean and took the top 2 steps on the podium. But behind them, there was more excitement from Dan Ticktum, who was running the alternate tyre strategy and starting on the hard tyres. He narrowly avoided a collision with a slow Yuri Vips, who pulled over and caused a safety car on lap 8, which led to madness in the pits as everyone piled in, double stacks everywhere. This handed the lead to Ticktum, who stayed out, continued running on the hard rubber, and his gamble was eventually rewarded when Liam Lawson's high-tech came to a standstill and brought out the third safety car of the race. Ticktum switched onto the softs, came back out in 11th, and began to scythe his way through the field as though he was racing the AI on easy mode. He almost had another incident when he got pitched between 2 cars, ran off the second chicane, but he was able to keep control of it, regained his composure, and continued running. Very much looked like he was on for the race win, reeling in the front runners, but unfortunately a collision between Beckman and Ben Biscal brought out the safety car for a 4th time, and he had to settle for the final place on the podium. But just a great race all round. Porcher and Ruvela rounded out the top 5. And after 3 really exciting races at the Temple of Speed, the updated driver standings are as follows. Oscar Piastri's feature win extends his lead at the top with 149 points. Guan Yu's double podium keeps him well within reach, just 15 points behind on 134. Robert Schwarzman's points finishes in all 3 races, including a podium, keeps him in third with 113 points. Dan Tickton made up for the disappointing sprint with that feature race. It keeps him in fourth on 104 points. Porsche's sprint victory and really good fourth place showing in the feature brings him up into the top 5. He's now on 94 points, while Yuri Vips falls to 6th on 90 points. Johan de Ruvela's sprint victory brings him up into 7th with 81 points, and rounding out the top 10 is Liam Lawson with 72 points. In the Constructors' Championship, Prema's good results bring them in a nice haul of points that move them out into a good lead with 262 points. Univirtuosi slotted right behind them in second with 193 points. Hot on their trail in third are Carlin with 185 points. And rounding out the top 5 are High Tech and ART with 162 points and 133 points respectively. So, with 3 rounds, 9 races to go, we've got a very close championship battle between the top 2, with third place still up for grabs, but so many points still on offer. Some of the amazing drives we saw this weekend, I wouldn't write anyone off just yet. Luckily, this time we don't have to wait long for the next chapter, as the next round takes place in Sochi next weekend alongside the Formula 3 finale. And with a total of 6 support races, that is a lot of ground I have to cover, so I'm looking forward to that.
Yes, you're going to have your work cut out following the Sochi weekend for both Formula 2 and Formula 3.
No doubt.
But yeah, just an absolutely crazy Formula 2 race to watch. If you haven't had the opportunity to do so, I strongly suggest you go and look the support races up on YouTube. There are highlights available. It was just an absolutely wacky race as I was probably waiting for Dick Dastardly to turn up, but there we go. So obviously we'll cover the F1 City season in a bit more detail, but it's looking very likely that if anyone is going to get a Formula 1 drive for next season, it's basically going to have to be, you've got to be the champion to get it.
Yeah, it feels like either you're going to have to be the champion, or, if rumours are to be believed, you're going to have to bring a lot of money with you.
Yes, unfortunately that is the case, but cool, excellent. Thank you very much, Tyson, and we look forward to hearing your reports on the F2 and F3 weekends at Sochi in a couple of weeks' time. Nothing else to report from the world of motorsport, so let's get straight into the action for the Formula 1 Italian Grand Prix. And the main headlines: Danny Ricciardo wins McLaren's first race since Brazil 2012. Norris following up in second place, giving McLaren their first 1-2 finish since the Canadian Grand Prix in 2010. Bottas to top off a very crazy race, came from the back of the grid to finish third. But the main talking point, Verstappen and Hamilton crash into each other again. This time Verstappen's car landing on top of Hamilton's car, taking them both out of the race. We will talk about that in a fair bit more detail later on. But as always, our 3 to follow. And we did the same as we did last weekend. So 3 random drivers picked out of a hat. The only rules was to be we're not allowed to have the same driver for 2 consecutive weekends, and once again the draw falling very kindly for me this weekend. The first driver that was picked out for me was Lewis Hamilton. Qualified second in the sprint race, had an awful time on that, dropping to 5th. Promoted to 4th on the grid for the race. But as mentioned, he had a DNF after colliding with Verstappen at the first chicane after coming out of his pit stop on lap 25. Hodders, it looked like we were on for a real good battle between the 2 title protagonists until that incident.
It really was. It looked like it was potentially going to be between those 2, considering, as I'll mention later, that Ricciardo had pitted, so made it wide open for the 2 of those. And we could have had a very fine race to the finish for the remaining 20-odd laps, but alas, it wasn't to be.
And Tyson, the race aside, Hamilton actually didn't appear to have had that good a weekend in Monza.
No, it was looking like Verstappen had it all under control until that pit stop. And you just wondered, did the red mist come down and cause Verstappen to make another silly mistake that was avoidable?
Yep, so we are going to talk about that in quite a bit of detail in talking points later on. Hodders, the first driver that came out for you was Esteban Ocon. Tell us about the Frenchman's weekend.
The one word I could use before I say anything else is relatively, well, two words, is relatively quiet. Qualified P14, was never really in the contention for the top 10, but a brave effort nonetheless. He finished 13th in the sprint race, although ended up in 12th on the grid due to Valtteri Bottas' penalty. And in the end, finishing in 10th place, so another point for the Frenchman in a relatively quiet race.
Yeah, good stuff. And Tyson, for Ocon, that's an all right result. Just calmly and quietly, just getting regular points finishes here and there. That's what him and what Alpine need.
Yeah, he got his head down, he got on with it, he avoided any major incidents, maybe just that one little touch with Vettel that was a bit rude, but yeah, other than that, nice quiet race for him.
Absolutely. And Tyson, you're the first of your three drivers you were keeping an eye on was our boy George Russell.
Yep, Mr. Saturday himself. So in practice, he finished P17, qualified P15, and then finished P15 in the sprint. Because of penalties, he started 14th in the race. Interesting to know the first time that his teammate Latifi has started ahead of him on the grid. But finished 9th, points again. He definitely benefited from the safety car. But once again, points for Williams.
Absolutely. And Hodders, obviously, we've made the clarification there. It wasn't a case of Russell being out qualified by his teammate on the grid, because we're not having that. But a very impressive weekend for Russell. Points again. He's certainly going from being Mr. Saturday to Mr. Weekend, effectively. He's getting the qualifying and the race results in when he needs them.
Absolutely, and we always thought he was going to get them, particularly when he had those occurrences where he was on to a winner for points and then just had really rotten luck for mechanical whatever reasons, and now he's actually converting those into Mr. Weekend, which I think puts him in very good stead for 2022.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking forward to seeing the battle between George and his teammate, Mr. Hamilton. Second driver for me was the Red Bull driver, Sergio Perez. Qualified in 9th for the sprint race, which is where he stayed. Promoted up to 8th because of penalties. He actually finished the race in 3rd, but was demoted to 5th after passing Leclerc off the track at the second chicane. He refused to give the place back, and the stewards taking a very dim view of it, handing him a 5-second time penalty. Hodders, the penalty, that was a slam dunk.
It really was a slam dunk. I mean, as we've seen before, if you gain an unfair advantage, right or wrong, by cutting a corner, you give it back or you will be penalised. And once again, it's proving that the rules are being applied fairly.
Yep, that's all we ever ask. And Tyson, we've mentioned it several times in this podcast, Sergio is he's committing silly offences, he's getting these penalties, and he's costing himself and his team vital points.
Yeah, he's just losing these points for the team that he really doesn't need to be doing. Just give the place back, have another attempt later.
Absolutely. And interesting, I was obviously having a look at all the the various bits of data available to me. So in terms of penalty points at the moment, so the drivers obviously have their penalty points across the season. So Perez is currently on 7, and he is actually the driver who's picked up the second most amount of points ever since they brought this penalty point system in 2015. So Perez needs to wind this in, because I think Perez's next lots of points that drop off are not until next season. So 5 more points between now and the end of the season, or even a couple of races into next season, which is not inconceivable. He will become the first ever driver to get the 12-point ban. So Hodders, Red Bull need to have a word with him and say, look, you're going to cost us points here, or you are costing points. You could cost us the championship.
Very true. I mean, this is something that every driver needs to be mindful of, is the penalty points they have. And Perez really has been putting himself into positions where he's building up those points quickly. See also the double whammy of having 5 seconds on 2 occasions earlier in the season. He really needs to watch himself.
Absolutely. Moving on to Hodder's your second driver, and another one who really had a bit of a poor weekend, Antonio Giovinazzi.
And it pains me to hear that when we've been singing his praises in the last couple of races and podcasts where he's really done rather well in that Alfa Romeo, and then he just seems to have thrown it away. And in this case, he did. He qualified P10. He once again made Q3, second successive race weekend, very impressive. 8th in the sprint, 7th on the grid due to Valtteri Bottas' penalty, as alluded to before. Unfortunately, he got into a spin, he clipped the bar and lost his front wing, causing a brief, and only brief, yellow flag, but had green flag quickly after that. He also ended up with a 5-second penalty for the unsafe rejoin, and all of that ended up with him finishing a very disappointing, under the circumstances, P13. He should have been top 10, really.
Yeah, absolutely should have finished top 10. Tyson, Giovinazzi's starting to show his qualifying form. He's been in Q3 the last 2 races. He's clearly fighting for his seat, but unfortunately, when the points are paying out, he is not putting in the performances, and worse, he's throwing away these opportunities.
Yeah, you can tell he is really trying at this point. He wants to keep that seat in F1. I just wonder, is he trying a little bit too hard? Because this is 2 races in a row now where, something's happened to him where it could have been avoided.
Yeah, and Hodders, I'm going to put you on the spot on this one. Will Giovinazzi be in Formula 1 next year?
It's very difficult to say yes or no definitively. I think it's still a case of watch this space.
Okay, so you're going to sit on the fence on that one. Fair enough. Yeah. Okay, so Tyson, the second driver you were keeping an eye on was Mick Schumacher.
Thank you. Yes, Mick Schumacher. Practice P20, qualified P18, sprint P19, and he started 18th. Wasn't really a good race for him. He had a clumsy moment when he tagged Sebastian Vettel and then had contact with Nikita Mazepin that spun him around. But he did finish, which was more than could be said for some drivers this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hodders, we've touched on this throughout the series. I think for Haas, it's the sooner that next year's car can come, the better, really, because I don't think unless we get one of those weird and really, really wacky races, Haas are not going to score points.
They really aren't, and it's a pity because they've earned points in the past, and let's face it, the chance of earning points this season is pretty slim, but they do need to be careful not to, they're breaking, as we said before, the cardinal rule of racing: don't try and take out your teammate.
And I strongly suspect that Gunther Steiner had more than a few strong words to say in the driver's debrief afterwards. Okay, so the third driver I was keeping a watching brief on, and I'm happy I was Lando Norris. Qualified 4th in the sprint, which is where he finished. Promoted up to 3rd after Valtteri Bottas got a penalty. He had an engine change just after the qualifying session, which meant he started the sprint, finished the sprint first, but unfortunately was sent to the back of the grid for the engine change. But for Lando Norris, started the race P3 and finished it in 2nd. A magnificent performance, a very diligent performance, and credit to Lando because he made the call to his team later on to look, do you want me to hold position? Would it be for the better team, or can I race? The team said, we prefer you to stay behind, Danny, which he did, and it gave McLaren's first 1-2 in over 10 years. Hodders, a sign that Norris's maturity is just growing and growing.
It's been tangibly and visibly and audibly growing throughout the season, but I think this weekend just goes to show it. He had the intelligence to ask. I mean, I think sometimes it's best to ask than to be told. And I think he realised he could have raced earlier on, but I think it was just one of those cases where it's better to ask, be told your position, defend, which I think earlier in the race he was doing as well. He was pretty much fending off Lewis Hamilton for quite a while Danny Rick was up front, and it all worked out well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tyson, as we saw, that safety car and the restart for Lando was absolutely superb. He went wheel to wheel with Leclerc on Ferrari home ground and did absolutely superb.
Yep, he got past Leclerc where he needed to, and yeah, he followed the team orders. I mean, he was faster than Ricciardo, I believe, so it was sensible for him to not pass, but Lando's time will come. He'll get that race win eventually. I believe it.
Yeah, Ricciardo was faster than him, to butcher a well-known phrase, but yeah, I don't think there is anybody that can begrudge Ricciardo the win, nor Norris getting second for a superb performance. And Hodders, that cues it up quite nicely to move on to the Honey Badger himself, Danny Ricciardo. What a weekend he had.
And I've got a smile on my face almost as big as the man's himself. What a weekend he had. He's had some blips in the past, but qualifying, or sprint qualifying as you call it, the actual qualifying, he finished P5. He was only 6,000th behind his teammate Lando Norris, though, so very respectable considering that throughout the season he's been saying he's been trying to get used to the car, but I think he's very much used to it and acclimatised to it now. Third in the sprint, second on the grid, again, because of Valtteri's penalty. First lap, first turn, sets off out the blocks like man determined, overtaking Max Verstappen during that opening lap. He only lost that lead for the pit stop and regained it and kept it to the finish. Great team effort between himself and Lando just to keep the 1-2. He did not put a wheel wrong. And I think one thing that was also very, very critical was the McLaren pit crew were on top of it this weekend. One pit stop, 2.4 seconds. Under the new regulations, that's very impressive. And I think it was a very great team effort to win there.
Absolutely, I think that is a very key factor. The teamwork that was involved, and Tyson, something we haven't seen for a good number of years. It's great to see those shoeies back on the podium.
Absolutely, this is just the kind of race Ricciardo needed. There have been questions, can he keep up with Norris? I think he definitely should this week. He's still got it.
Yes, I'm having to eat a big slice of humble pie at the moment because I have been one of the ones that has questioned whether Danny Ricciardo can keep up to the end. But chapeau, Danny, because that was a superb performance. And to round off the drivers that we've been keeping an eye on, Tyson, you've been keeping an eye on the Aston Martin driver, Lance Stroll.
Yes, the recently reconfirmed Stroll for Aston Martin next year. He finished practice P4, qualified P12, finished P10 in the sprint, which started in 9th on the grid, and can I say that was a lovely livery this weekend with the 007 decals. He finished 7th. He got his elbows out versus his teammate Vettel at the start, which is good to see that, he's actually fighting now. He's making his way through the pack, and he just had a solid weekend in general.
Yeah, it was a bit cheeky the elbows out with it, especially with your teammate. But it was all good battling. Yeah, sort of stuff that we do see on lap 1, and that's fine. And Hodders, Stroll has obviously had his position confirmed for 2022. Would it be fair to say that next year he needs to deliver the results?
I agree. I mean, he's one of those who gets slightly mocked on occasion because he's there because his father owns the team, yada, yada. The points that have been done to there, so I won't labour those points. But I think it's more, I think we were saying in the lead-up, you were saying that he wasn't so much inconsistent as he's been indifferent. I think he just needs to get some more consistent, solid results. He's showing he can do it. He just needs it on a more regular basis. I know he's competing with Vettel as well as a team. But again, Aston Martin could do with the points, and I think he just needs to get into those points positions more regularly. He's more than capable.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely agree with that. It's just score the points, get the top 10 finishes both qualifying and the race on a more regular basis, and I think that will make Daddy nice and happy, because of course we have got a lot of young talent coming up through the Formula 2, Formula 3, and potentially the W Series fields as well.
Yeah.
So we'll have to keep an eye on that one. Anyway, moving on to the winners and spinners now. I'm going to mix it up a bit. Tyson, we'll go to you first this time round. Tell us about your winners and spinners.
Well, I could only give the win to, one team, McLaren. And I'm totally showing my bias here because I'm Team Papaya, but it was a perfect weekend for them. The gamble in the sprint race with the soft tyres paid off. Ricciardo got that incredible start. He and Norris were able to keep Verstappen and Hamilton behind them, respectively. Norris, he got the great restart after the safety car, and yeah, they just didn't put a foot wrong all weekend.
And it's a good point that you mentioned there, actually, Tyson, in that, they actually were keeping, the likes of Mercedes and Red Bull. And bearing in mind, McLaren have got the same power unit as Mercedes. They were keeping them behind on merit. So Hodders, it was just plain driving ability, and it actually looked like Norris had the better of Hamilton on several occasions.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at the number of laps wherein he was not only fending off Lewis when he was in DRS range, when DRS was being initiated, his defensive driving was incredible. It was very much commendable and mature.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, possibly not so mature, Tyson, was your spinner.
Yeah, I have to give it to Max Verstappen this weekend. The poor pit stop by Red Bull, 11 seconds, and just another example of him losing his cool when the pressure's really on. And Red Bull, they're in a hard championship fight with Mercedes. They cannot afford this at this point.
I mean, we've all got our own opinions on the actual collision itself, which we'll get into shortly. But I think for me, what was really poor is that he didn't check on the welfare of Lewis, because he quite clearly would have walked past and seen that his Red Bull has gone over the top of the roll hoop and the halo on Lewis's car. He didn't at the very least check to see, was he okay? Whereas, I think if we refer back to the collision between Bottas and Russell at Imola, that was a big accident. They both went to, I think, firstly check on each other and then have a bit of an angry exchange. But that was very unprofessional by Verstappen, and it's not what we want to see. Hodders, who are your winners and spinners this weekend?
Well, my winner, I wasn't sure for a while, then I've actually settled on somebody, and my winner is the Monegasque driver Charles Leclerc. Main reason being is, he wasn't exactly pushing for first place, but he had a very, very good weekend as a whole. He kept close to Carlos Sainz in qualifying. He wasn't too far behind, only several thousandths or so. Improved his position in the sprint as well, and then finishing off with an excellent fourth place. And I think fourth place is nothing to be sniffed at, particularly with how wide open the race became.
Yeah, absolutely. Leclerc was running, apart from obviously the pit stop cycle. I think he was running top 5 pretty much the whole race, which was really, really good. Tyson, these are the sort of performances that at the moment Ferrari needs to be going, because they're just not able at the moment to consistently battle for wins and for podiums.
Yeah, they are very much in that best of the rest category along with McLaren, but Leclerc is just putting in solid, consistent drives weekend after weekend after weekend, and that's exactly what Ferrari needs.
It is indeed. Unfortunately, as someone who had a magnificent weekend this time last year, had an awful one this weekend.
Yeah, and it's another of those drivers I have a soft spot for, admittedly, but I'm going to have to be objective here. It has to be Pierre Gasly as a spinner. He did very well to qualify in a very respectable position for the sprint. Unfortunately, of course, he had his crash after contact that he initiated with Daniel Ricciardo in the first lap, ended up having to start pretty much from the pit lane. And even then, I think the effects of the sprint clearly had an effect on the car, as within 3 laps he had to retire the car due to suspension issues. very much a lot of promise thrown away through foolish deeds.
Yeah, and Tyson, Gazzy would have been walking away from Monza wondering, what if?
Yeah, it was very disappointing considering what happened in 2020, but it just goes to show you can't win the race in the sprint. You've got to just keep the forward momentum going all weekend.
Absolutely. And again, I'm going to mix it up. I'm going to do my spinner first, and I'm going to give it to Giovinazzi. As we've already covered earlier, a promising qualifying again and a good sprint performance. All that hard work undone in just 5 corners. Cuts the first chicane. Doesn't rejoin the track safely. Then chops across the Ferrari, pitching him into the barriers. Loses his front wing. And to cap it off, he gets a time penalty for an unsafe rejoin. So drops him to 13th. But my winner of the weekend, and it's got to be the winner of the race, Danny Ricciardo, an absolutely corking start. He was just on it from practice, all throughout the qualifying, the sprint, all throughout the race, giving the Honey Badger a thoroughly deserved win. And I think all of us here at Double Wave Yellows, we could not be happier for Danny Rick and the McLaren team Hodders.
We really couldn't. I mean, to have a win for McLaren is something I think we've been looking forward to for a very, very long time. I think all throughout the season, I think we've always had in the back of our minds, even if we haven't always said it, that eventually, if, as events happened, I think even as far back as Silverstone, we're thinking if things like that happened again, would it open up for other teams? And yes, it did. McLaren have got more than enough capabilities to win more races than this, and I think they will.
Mm-hmm. And it's obviously going to be very critical now in the championship, which we will check on shortly. And lastly, honourable mentions, and we're going to give an honourable mention to Valtteri Bottas, having won the sprint race and giving him 3 championship points. He unfortunately was then knocked to the back of the grid for an engine change, but he just absolutely flew through the field, benefited from the safety car, ended up finishing the race in 4th, but because of Perez's penalty, he was promoted to 3rd. Tyson, Bottas was just like an unleashed maniac in that race. It was brilliant.
It was, and this is exactly the Bottas I want to see. I've been very critical of him this season because he's not been performing too well, but to take it all the way from the back up to the podium, yeah, that deserves compliments.
Absolutely. And Hodders, hopefully we will continue to see this for the rest of the championship and indeed going into next year when Bottas goes to Alfa Romeo.
I'd love to see it, and I think that Valtteri Bottas, with his pedigree and his experience, I think he has every possibility of doing well in that Alfa Romeo. Even if it isn't necessarily always pushing for podiums, I think he could do similar to what Giovinazzi has been doing in terms of qualification, maybe even following it through to the whole rest of the weekend on the day on Sunday.
Mm-hmm. And Hodders, we have mentioned it several times throughout the season. Bottas and Perez, they actually need to really realise the importance of their role as the number 2 drivers, because they need to be getting the points in as much as the lead drivers, especially when it's getting close in the championship.
Absolutely. I think sometimes it's a case of realising, yes, you're number 2, but that doesn't make you any less important. You're still there to support the number 1 in getting as many points as possible, as demonstrated by Messrs Norris and Ricciardo this weekend.
Absolutely. Right. On to talking points, and we are going to keep you in suspense a little bit longer because we're going to talk about something else that has come up in discussion throughout the weekend, and that is the sausage curse. You're thinking, what, sausages on a Formula 1 track? What are you on about? But it is the very high yellow and orange curves that we saw at the first and the second chicane. Tyson, I'll come to you first because we've seen over the years these sausage curves, they're a great deterrent for stopping drivers cutting the chicane. But as we saw in the F3 race in 2019, these are highly dangerous if drivers go over these at speed.
Yeah, I think it's something we were talking about a few days ago. They are a very good deterrent because you are going to lose time if you go over them. But as the cars become safer, the drivers start taking more chances, and you just wind up with these accidents that yeah, you just wonder, how do they walk away from these?
Yeah, and actually that's a very good point because it's something that we've talked about off air. Hodders, because of the big accidents we've seen over the last few years, where drivers have basically just dusted off their overalls, got out and said, "Hey, never mind." Predominantly because of the halo, are the drivers now taking, as a collective, too much of a risk? Are they pushing the limits of the cars and the tracks to dangerous limits?
It's a difficult one to say yes to everyone because I have to do general, but it is getting to the point where I think some drivers are just getting a bit too cocksure of themselves and the cars. Cars have capability, but so do human bodies as well, and we'd rather not have those limits exceeded.
Yep, absolutely. Good
Mm-hmm.
point. Let us obviously know in the comments, what do you think? Do you think the sausage curves, are they a deterrent or are they too dangerous? To say, make sure you comment below, but make sure you click the like and the subscribe buttons first. We will give you, of course, all of the reviews throughout the season. It's usually on a Thursday or a Friday after each race. Plus, we'll probably have some more VSC podcasts coming up as well. Right, we're going to not keep you at suspense any longer. The championship battle, Lewis versus Max, round 13. And oh boy, for the fourth time this season, they collide. They'd obviously collided at Imola in the first chicane. It was just a race, lap one incident. We've talked to death about what happened at Silverstone. There is a VSC podcast about that. Go and have a look. They did come together at the second chicane on lap one at Monza, but Hodders, lap 26, it all changed.
Yes, it did. We had the situation where Max Verstappen was dogged by an 11.5-second pit stop. I think it was a sensor problem, but it was unduly slow, especially for the team that has some of the fastest pit stops, well, almost ever, really, including this season. He comes through. It's a tight turn. There's contact between the rear tyres, which I think we all agree from what we've seen is that, unfortunately, because both tyres were rolling, is that because of that contact and the angle of the contact, Max's right rear goes up above the rear left of Lewis's car, sends him airborne, and unfortunately ends up with his, thankfully stationary right rear tyre ending up impacted with the halo of Lewis's car, and both on the gravel out of the race.
Yeah, big collision. Obviously, it was the main twist in the race because obviously it triggered the safety car. We'll get into who was at fault in a bit, but Hodders, we talked about obviously the way Max behaved after the collision. It wasn't great.
It was unsporting, it was discourteous, and to be quite honest, it was quite rude under the circumstances. Compare and contrast when there's been accidents with other drivers before. You've had the likes of, talk about him very often, Seb Vettel pulling over, whatever, checking they're all right, that sort of thing. Compared to that, it was utterly childish and disrespectful more than anything else, and it's not acceptable to a worldwide audience, particularly to us.
Yeah, and also, that Silverstone incident, Lewis was on the radio asking, "Is Max okay?" So yeah, not great. Tyson, as I said, it's the fourth time that these drivers have come together. Clearly, somebody needs to have a word with these two because there could now be potential that as these drivers keep banging into each other, they could actually end up involving the other drivers, and that is an absolute no-no.
It's very possible, yeah. The whole situation, I thought, had boiled over at Silverstone, but it exploded at Monza this weekend. And yeah, it's just getting to the point now where I think both of them need to rein it in a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think this is where perhaps Michael Massey, the race director, needs to pull them both aside and possibly involve their team managers as well and say, look, the stewards are doing their job. They've been obviously dealing with the penalties and whatever, but you have a duty of care to your fellow drivers. This is the fourth time it's happened now. By all means, go hard wheel-to-wheel racing, but be careful because we don't want anyone getting injured. And also, just thinking about this actually sort of, there have been comparisons with, Prost and Senna, Schumacher and Hill, and Hamilton and Rosberg to an extent. So this needs to stop. In terms of who the stewards felt was at fault, they felt that Verstappen was predominantly at fault, and they have given him a 3-place grid penalty for the following race in Sochi. Hodders, firstly, do you think anyone was at fault? And secondly, what do you think about the penalty for Max?
This is an opinion of mine. I think it was very much a case in this one of pretty much 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It was a racing incident, both equally at fault or equally contributing to it. They were both in a corner that was too tight, neither gave each other the space, and then you had the racing incident that happened. As for the penalty, I feel I appreciate that it's the minimum penalty for it, but I think putting it predominantly or primarily on the side of Max causing the incident, I think was done. I think it was a little bit harsh. I think it was a racing incident; it should have been left at that. But I do respect the stewards' ruling at the same time, though. I may not agree with it, but I respect it.
Absolutely. And Tyson, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I feel the same. Looking at it on the Sunday, I felt it was a racing incident. Both of them had a portion of the blame. I still think that, but Verstappen, we know he is a very uncompromising, unyielding driver. He's been involved in many incidents like this, and it was a little ironic that he came on the radio and said, that's what you get when you don't leave the space, because it's something he's done many times himself. So I just wonder if all his previous antics have maybe swayed the stewards a little bit to give the penalty to him for this one.
It's plausible. I mean, I won't read you the full text from the stewards because it's about half a page worth. But I mean, this was the view. So, in the opinion of the stewards, this manoeuvre was attempted too late for the driver of car 33, which is Verstappen, to have, quote, the right to racing room, unquote. While car 44 could have steered further from the curb to avoid the incident, the stewards determined that his position was reasonable and therefore find that the driver of car 33 was predominantly to blame for the incident. Now, obviously, the stewards have got a lot more information than we see. They've got footage that we don't see. They've obviously got all of the onboard cameras. They've got the telemetry, so they will obviously have a lot of information available to them to make that decision. It's interesting, Tyson, you mentioned, obviously, Max Verstappen's sort of previous record. As I mentioned earlier, Sergio Perez, he's got the second most amount of points since they brought this system in. Max Verstappen, since they brought this system in 2015, has accrued 23 penalty points across 13 offences. Now, at the moment, he's only got 2 in his licence because the points expire after a year. So 2 points, same as Lewis Hamilton. And he's had actually, it's his first two points of the season. He's obviously had a very, very clean season in terms of offences. But Hodders, again, that almost, I don't want to say reputation, but to have almost double the amount of penalty points across your career than the driver you're battling against for the championship, something needs to be ticking over in Max's head, really.
It does make you wonder. I mean, to have that huge disparity when you're going for a world championship really does make you think, maybe I need to back off a little. I mean, I'd like to hope that the stewards didn't make their decision on past record. It should be on the the instance at hand. But previous record certainly can't help.
Yeah, and I think actually the stewards basically just look at the facts that are presented, and then they've got a whole list of sort of previous examples when determining what time penalty and obviously how many penalty points to put on the license. So I don't think past record comes into account unless obviously you're looking at a potential race ban. So yeah, that's our thoughts on it. Obviously, let us know in the comments what you think of it. So round, I think it was round 14. I've got in my notes. Yeah, round 14, not round 13. So apologies for that. So, in terms of the standings in the championship. No change in the Drivers' Championship in terms of the top two. Verstappen still leads on 226.5 points from Lewis Hamilton on 221.5 points. Verstappen actually has extended his lead courtesy of those points during the sprint event. Bottas up to 141 points in third. Lando Norris still fairly close behind on 132. Perez on 118. Leclerc and Sainz 104 and 97.5 points respectively in 6th and 7th. Danny Ricciardo with that 26-point haul brings him well up into the top 10 on to 83 points. Pierre Gasly on 66 and Fernando Alonso topping up the top 10 on 50 points. In the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes increased their lead to 362.5 points from Red Bull on 344 and a half point, an 18-point lead. McLaren with that absolute maximum haul of 44 points put themselves comfortably into third on 215 points. Ferrari not too far behind on 201.5 points. Alpine in fifth on 95. AlphaTauri on 84. Aston Martin on 59. Williams on 22. I think it's fair to say that they are almost guaranteed to be finishing 8th there, which is a great result. Alfa Romeo on 3 points. Haas bringing up the rear still on 0. We were alluding to it earlier. The silly season is nearly completed with the news that Sebastian Vettel and Lance Stroll are confirmed at Aston Martin for the 2022 season. Just one seat is now vacant for next season, and that is the Alfa Romeo seat alongside Valtteri Bottas. So the next race will be the Russian Grand Prix in Sochi on the 26th of September, and you can catch us when we do the Russian Grand Prix review on the 30th of September. And lastly, just some final thoughts from us. Tyson, a great result for McLaren, especially the Shui celebrations, and a great image for the sport as well.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been a rough few years for McLaren, but I've never lost the faith, so I'm just thrilled to see this weekend.
But you had the racing red t-shirt out, nice, ready to celebrate. But as much as we laugh and chuckle at that, Hodders, the title contenders, have clashed again.
And we knew it wasn't the last of it at Silverstone either, and this is really coming to a fall. Something has really got to give soon, otherwise we're going to have something much more serious, and we don't want to cover that.
Mm-hmm. And we, as I say, we've mentioned before, we don't want the championship decided in the stewards' room. We don't want that. Hodders, Tyson, my thanks as always to you guys for your contributions, and of course my thanks to you for listening and watching. As I said, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave us a comment. We look forward to hopefully hearing from you and you listening into our podcast in a couple of weeks' time when we review all the action at Sochi, including the Formula 2 and Formula 3 double header. As always, be good, and if you can't be good, be safe. From all of us here, thanks very much, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.